Alright, another concept was a factor theorem. Now, factor theorem states that if we can find one of the factors, so one of the factors would represent your x-intercepts and give you the factors once we divide it out, and then we can find the others. So if p of b equals 0, then b of 0 is the x-intercept and x minus 0 is the factor. Okay, so basically what we're going to do when we get to this point, okay, we first try to factor. We're going to have x squared. So there's 4 terms. I'm going to factor by grouping. Factor out of the first 2 terms, x squared. We're left with x plus 1. Okay, out of these second 2 terms, I notice that they're both negative. So I'm going to try to factor out a negative, say 4, because they both share a 4. So that's just going to leave me with 2x plus 3. Now, there's nothing else to factor out on here, and there's nothing else to factor out on this binomial, so I'm stuck. Factoring by grouping did not work, but I do know that if I plug in certain values, I'm going to go ahead and see if this entire thing equals 0. So p of b, just a fancy way of saying f of x. Okay, I'm just trying to get you into the mode that this is some SAT likes to throw in other letters all the time, and so does AP Math. Okay, f of x is the same thing as saying p of b. In this case, let's go ahead and see when p of b, when this whole equation equals 0, that's going to give us our x-intercepts. But we don't know what to plug in just yet. And this is where this is my least favorite theorem, because we have to just pick numbers to randomly plug in to see if it equals this equation. So if we plug in 1 cubed plus 2 squared minus 8 times 1 minus 12. Alright, well that's just going to give me 1. This is going to give me plus 4 minus 8, okay, minus 12. I'm looking at this right now and I can tell you this is not going to equal 0, so 1 is not going to be one of my factors. Okay, so 1's not going to work. Well, if you were given a calculator during this time, you could probably look at the graph and see where it crosses the x-axis, okay, or wherever you have the x-intercepts. Here we have one of them. Okay, this is going to be called a point of inflection, and we'll get into that later on with sign analysis. Okay, but right here, this is where it crosses. So I'd end up with 2 solutions at least, here and here. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. If I know that one of the x-intercepts is 3, 0, then b is going to be represented, b is represented by 3. If I know that, solving it backwards, I can set this equal and find what that binomial is, because I know, okay, x equals 3. In order to set this equal to 0, I just have to subtract 3 to both sides, and x minus 3 would be one of my binomial terms. Okay. Now, if I have one term, I can find the others. The next step is, remember when we synthetically divided? This doesn't work, by the way, so I'm just going to cross it out. We have one of those terms. We need to see if this is going to be a factor of that. We already know it is, but we need to see what the other factors are. And we can use synthetic division to be able to find that. First step, see what x equals. We already know x equals 3. We said it we already went backwards to find that term. So 3 is going to be on the outside of our synthetic division, and we're going to look at the coefficients to set up the inside. So the coefficients for the terms are going to determine what's on the inside. So this is 1, 1, negative 8, negative 12. If I'm missing an x value, then I would place a 0 in there, because that truly means that I need a 0 as a placeholder. So we're going to bring down the 1. First step when we synthetically divide. 1 times 3 is going to give you 3. 1, and then combine the columns. So that's going to give us 1 plus 3, which is 4. 3 times 4, which is 12. Add the columns. This is going to just end up being 4. And then 4 times 3 is 12. And combining these, the columns, we'd end up with 0. You must have 0 as your remainder. If you do not, then you need to go back to your factor, because this is incorrect. Alright, so let's go ahead and rewrite the binomial. So we know one of them is x minus 3. Okay, and the next part is we can go ahead and take a look. And because we divided a cubic by x, what is x to the third divided by x? That's x squared plus 4x plus 4. Okay, so we're going to end up with a quadratic. And we're not quite finished. We need to see if we can factor anything further. And we can, because this is a perfect square trinomial, which is something we talked about on this front page. Okay, so a perfect square trinomial we can go ahead and factor out. Okay. So if we're factoring this out, I'm going to bring down the x minus 3. And I need to look at factors of 4 that get, when I add them together, give me 4. And in this case, it's x plus 2 and x plus 2. Okay, you're pretty much done here, but I'm going to rewrite it as x plus 2 squared. Whenever you have a term squared, you're actually going to end up with a point of inflection. And that's what we were seeing here on the graph. Okay, there was a point of inflection at -2. Notice how we have two values at -2. Right here's your point of inflection. And then if you only have one value, it actually crosses and goes into the other quadrant. Okay, that's kind of a preview of what's coming next. Alright, but this is as far as you had to go for this lesson. Let's go ahead and take a look at this next problem. Okay, so first step, always see if you can factor it out the ways you know how to factor. I'm going to tell you right now, those will not work, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at, because no factors of 12 will add up to give you -13. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is we're going to go ahead and kind of pick numbers until we can figure out when this equals 0. Okay, instead of going through that, so go ahead and try one, pause the video and go ahead and try 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, and come back and see. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, 4 is going to work as one of our solutions, okay, and we're just going to go ahead and factor that out. So I know one of the terms is going to be x minus 4, because we have an ordered, not an ordered, we have a crossing at the x equals 4. Okay, so when we're going to go ahead and factor this out, we're going to factor 4 out of all of the coefficients. The coefficients, we're going to start off with x to the third. That's going to be, there's one of those. How many x squareds do you have? Notice how you're missing a term, so we still need that place value of 0 there. Okay, and then -13 is x to the first, and then -12. Now, looking forward, we're going to go ahead and bring down the first term always. Okay, 1 times 4 is going to give you 4. Combine the columns. That's going to give you 4. 16, or 4 times 4 is 16. Okay, combine those columns. You're left with 3. 3 times 4 is going to give you +12. And when you combine these columns, that gave you the 0, and that should work every single time. You need to make sure you have the 0. Okay, now I factored a cubic bilinear equation, so this is just going to give you x squared plus 4x plus 3, okay, as our in trinomial. So I know for a fact it's x minus 4 times x squared plus 4x plus 3. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and see if I can factor that further. Okay, whoop, not negative, or not positive. Okay, bring those two terms down. What factors of 3 are going to add up to give me 4? That's really just going to be 3 and 1. And we're going to add those together. Okay, so looking at this, this is as far as you factor, you end up with all linear terms. Okay, later on, we're going to see them set equal to 0, and we're going to have a crossing at +4, -3, and -1. Okay, but that's kind of a preview. Now, when you're given a factor and you need to see whether or not it is a factor of a term, you're just going to go ahead and use synthetic division to go ahead and solve that out. Now, we already did this equation up here. Okay, we already factored out 3, so we're going to skip this one. Okay, if you really want to write it down, you can just state that it's going to be x minus 3, x plus 2 squared, and you're good to go. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look at the last one. Okay, looking at the last one, we need to check to see if x plus 4 is a factor. So when we're checking that, first step in synthetic division is go ahead and set your binomial equal to 0, and x is just going to equal -4. So if I know that already, x equals -4, we're going to have a crossing on the x-axis at -4. Now we need to figure out what the other term is. Okay, so our coefficients that are going to be brought on the inside when we synthetically divide, not missing anything, okay, are going to be 1, -5, +2, okay, +8. We're just taking the coefficients and then the constant at the end. Bring down the 1, that's just going to bring down, moving on to the next step. Bring down the 1, then we're going to multiply by -4. -4 times 1 is going to give you -4. -5 combined with -4 is -9. -4 times -9 is going to give you +27. Okay, or 36, sorry. Combine that, that's going to give you 38. Okay, multiplied -4 times +38, and that's going to give you -152. Okay, when I combine that, does that equal 0? No. So then x plus 4 is not. X plus 4 is not a factor. Okay, so then you would stop right here. Okay, and explain why, because it did not synthetically divide. Okay, alright, let's go ahead and take a look at the last question, and I'm going to stop here because we'll touch on the rational root theorem on Monday or Tuesday. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the very last problem. Okay, and we're just seeing whether or not this is a factor of that. And the first step is we're going to go ahead and set it equal to 0. And solve for what the x-intercept would be. In this case it's -1, and we're going to go ahead and synthetically divide to see if it's a factor. I'm missing, right now I can already tell that the x squared is not there, so I need to make sure that I include that it's a 0x squared. So there is a coefficient of 1, 0, -13, -12. Okay, and I can go ahead and start dividing. Bring down the 1. 1 times -1 is just going to give you -1. Combine that, -1. -1 times -1 is going to give you +1. Combine those terms. We end up with -2, or 12. Okay, next step is we're going to go ahead and multiply. -1 times -12 gives us +12. And when I combine those terms, we end up with 0, and that's awesome. Okay, so that means that this is a factor, and we can go ahead and continue on. When I divided a cubic by a linear, so that's x to the third divided by x to the first, you really subtract when you divide, so you're left with x squared minus x minus 12 as your trinomial left over. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look. X plus 1 times x squared minus 1x minus 12, and we need to factor this further if we can. Okay, I'm going to bring down this x plus 1. So in this term, you can go ahead and use AC method, or you can go ahead and just see what the factors of 12 are. That'll give you -1. This is x. Okay, so looking at -12, the two factors are going to be 4 and 3, but I end up with a -1, so the -4 is negative. Alright. Okay, that's as far as you need to go right now, because when you factor, you leave it in terms of binomials. Don't go any further than that. Okay, if you have any questions, please let me know. Like I said, this part we're going to work on together on Monday or Tuesday of next week. Okay, and I hope you had a great weekend. Bye.